Hello, and welcome to Global Data Themes Instant Insights. At Global Data, we define a theme as something that keeps a CEO awake at night, as businesses that invest in important themes will succeed, and those that don't will fail.
Hello, and welcome to Instant Insights. I'm Dan Clark, and today I'll be talking to Konrad Wojciech from Global Data Sport and Nick Wyatt from Global Data Travel and Tourism about the upcoming Qatar Football World Cup, sponsorship trends, fan engagement, and travel and tourism issues. How are you guys doing?
Very well, thank you, Dan.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dan. Thanks for having us on.
No problem. Konrad, so what is the landscape looking like in terms of sponsorship? Have there been many drop-offs, and could sponsors face a backlash given the controversy surrounding the World Cup?
Well, from a revenue point of view, the brands have remained, brands want to associate themselves with the biggest events, and the World Cup is one of the two largest sporting events on earth, alongside the Olympic Games. This World Cup boasts 27 unique partnerships, and some of the biggest brands in the world are associated with this World Cup. They're spending an average of just over 63 million on their partnership. Obviously, some are FIFA partners paying at the top end, and some are more local partners. But from a revenue generating point of view, over 1.7 billion has been committed to this World Cup from a sponsorship point of view. So the brands aren't retreating. In terms of reputational damage, that may come. I think, we've seen a lot of people talk about how they're not going to watch the World Cup. I haven't seen too many sort of adverts associating these brands with the World Cup. I've started to hear a few. But if you compare it to sort of previous editions, even the previous World Cup in Russia, the sort of brand activity around this World Cup hasn't been as sort of prominent as it used to be. And I think the fact that from a Western point of view, we're in the run-up to Christmas, allows brands a bit of wiggle room, and they can associate themselves, they can focus on Christmas more than they will potentially the World Cup. So just from a reputational point of view, not too many brands are putting their head above the parapet.
Thank you very much for that, Konrad. So as you said, many people are talking about boycotting the World Cup. So do you think this will have a tangible impact on the more broadcasting aspect, but also on the general reputation of FIFA?
I think there's a lot of people that are uncomfortable with the World Cup taking place in Qatar for various reasons. If we're looking at sort of social aspects, the human rights aspects and things like that, there is an impact on that. I think we'll only find out what the answer to that is once we start seeing the viewing figures. And so again, we might not even sort of see that until after the World Cup. But the last World Cup was watched by 3.5 billion people in Russia. So from that point of view, I think you will still see a huge global audience. The timing of it is interesting. A Winter World Cup's never been done before. So it'll be interesting to see what that number looks like. In certain key markets for FIFA, in terms of growing the game, the United States is sort of top of that list. This World Cup's actually clashing with the NFL season, which is a significant drawback from FIFA's point of view. So it will be interesting to see what those numbers look like, especially for certain key markets and around certain games. I think reputationally, FIFA has an issue. But if you look at someone like the IOC, for example, they've hosted Olympic Games in places like China without, while there's been a reputational sort of backlash, the IOC continues to sort of generate revenue, continues to draw in partners. So I think from that point of view, there is still significant opportunity for FIFA moving forward.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Konrad. So, Global Data defines sports washing as the practice of an individual group, corporation, or nation state using sport to improve its reputation through hosting a sporting event, the purchase or sponsorship of sporting teams, or by the participation in the sport itself. So, FIFA has continued to praise Qatar's efforts in the build-up to the World Cup, despite the ongoing human rights allegations. How do you think they'll respond to this criticism when the tournament actually begins?
Interesting question. I think, what FIFA has sort of done is asked many of the nations taking part to not raise these issues during the tournament. It'll be interesting to see how the actual individual nations respond. I know, as an example, England have said that they will speak out while they're there. Denmark and their partner Hummel have sort of been quite vocal in terms of their thoughts on the Qataris hosting the World Cup. Even this week, we've seen a few players. I think Bruno Fernandes of Manchester United and Portugal came out after the game on Sunday to sort of make his displeasure known in that regard. So I think while FIFA would like everyone to sort of stick to the script, I think that's easier said than done, especially around certain, again, human rights issues. So the issues surrounding sort of migrant workers and the LGBTQ community and things like that in Qatar. I think those are issues that will be raised subtly, potentially, but I still think that attention will be drawn to them. So while FIFA would like everything to go smoothly, I think that we may see some athletes being quite outspoken during the tournament, and we'll see what happens.
It's very interesting. It's going to be something else to watch other than the football, that's for sure. Thanks for that, Conrad. So, Nick, is the World Cup going to drive a large amount of tourism to Qatar? And is Qatar actually prepared to deal with the influx of visitors?
I think sort of firstly on the first part of that question, and simply put, yes, it will drive a large amount of tourism to Qatar. They've sold around 2.5 million tickets already by FIFA's sort of most recent statement on sales. They did acknowledge that Qatar is the domicile market with the most sales, but this was then followed by sort of geographically diverse group of countries, which included Saudi Arabia, the US, Mexico, UAE, England, Argentina, Brazil, Wales, and Australia. So what that is telling us is that there are going to be fans genuinely flocking in from all over the world into Qatar. So yes, the short answer is it will drive large amounts of visitation. In terms of is it prepared, that's sort of less simple, the answer to that. I think in terms of connectivity, it's extremely strong. Qatar Airways is an extremely highly regarded airline. Hamad International Airport in Doha is a world-class airport with the ability to handle very high passenger volumes. So in terms of connectivity and actually kind of getting people into the country, I don't think they have any sort of real problem there. The issue has been around discussions of a lack of accommodation options. And it depends kind of whose view you're listening to as to sort of which side of the fence you fall on here. There's been some sort of clamoring from fans that there's been there's a lack of rooms, and rooms that were there were extremely expensive as a result of supply and demand issues. But the sort of Supreme Committee of Delivery and Legacy for the World Cup, which is essentially the organisers, they're actually saying that there are still 25,000 rooms available to be booked. And the difference here is that that's because that is including temporary accommodation that has been erected, especially for the World Cup. You see descriptions of tents and porta cabins and these sorts of things. There are people, booking these things. And as I say, that committee is saying, yes, there's plenty of availability still there when it comes to these accommodation options. And I think you have to give them some credit because they've done a really good job of making sure that those things are there and are in place, because it's not a simple, straightforward, easy exercise. So that there is accommodation there. It might just not be in the sense of kind of permanent hotel rooms that maybe fans have been used to at previous events. That said, there are a not insignificant number of fans that are going to be staying outside of Qatar. So there are fans staying in sort of mostly other neighboring states in the GCC. UAE is one that stands out, mainly Dubai. Oman, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain are also been mentioned. And what that means is that some of the airlines, Qatar, Fly Dubai, Oman Air, and Saudia, are among airlines that are offering shuttle flights. So they're going to shuttle fans into Qatar so they can watch the game, maybe spend a day in Qatar before then flying back again on the match day shuttle flights. And I guess the question there is that, what does that mean in terms of legacy and spend? Because it is maybe minimizing the time that those fans are actually going to be spending in Qatar, and actually perhaps the benefit is to some of those neighboring countries more than Qatar in those cases.
Thank you very much for that. And that brings me nicely onto my next question, which is essentially from a tourism perspective, do you think there is any scope for a lasting legacy in tourism in Qatar?
Yes, I do, because obviously part of what happens, in the run up to an event is building infrastructure, building some of the things that you need and require to become a sort of major tourism destination. And it's a great opportunity. It's actually pretty much a sort of, unrivaled opportunity, as Conrad alluded to. So around 3.5 billion people watched the last World Cup, and I think FIFA president Gianni Infantino reckons that there'll be somewhere around 5 billion people watching this one. Now, if you even get anywhere close to that number, that's an unbelievable marketing opportunity. That's a large number of eyes to get the destination in front of, and it's not easy to get even remotely close to that number through normal sort of marketing campaigns and channels. So it's a great showcase for Qatar as a destination. I mean, a legacy is far from guaranteed. I think the history of World Cup events does tell us that. But if, they use this as a sort of solid platform and part of a wider strategy, then they can certainly grow visitation in the sort of in the longer term than just, as a one-off hit for this event.
That's really interesting. Thanks for that. So like you said, the 2018 World Cup in Russia received 3.57 billion viewers across the tournament. Do you think this number is expected to grow for the 2022 competition, despite the timing of the event and the human rights allegations surrounding it?
I would suggest that the sort of timing of the event is going to be the sort of main hindrance to that. Nick suggested, or Nick sort of referenced Gianni Infantino thinking that he's going to get an audience of around 5 billion. I think given the location, given the time of certain games to kick off, if you look at the UK timings and things like that, there's some very early starts there, relatively speaking. I think the last time you had this sort of starting point was for Japan and Korea back in 2002. I'm sure a few of us remember doing beer and breakfast and things like that. So I don't think we're quite at that stage for this one, but in some markets it will be. There'll be some games kicking off before the Americans wake up, for example, and things like that. And again, as I suggested earlier, that's a key market. I think you could see a lower than predicted audience, but again, if you're sort of matching what was done in the last World Cup, or even a slight increase, then I think FIFA will take that quite happily, especially with the next World Cup being held in North America. Then I think it's a case of getting through this one for the organisers, for partners, for brands, and everyone else. So I think it'll be interesting to see what that number actually looks like at the end.
Thank you very much for that. So finally, the most difficult question of them all. Who's your pick to win the World Cup?
I'm going Brazil. I actually do fancy Brazil. People say that sort of every time, but I do fancy Brazil. There's a little bit of a gamble there because with some of the defenders that they've taken, I think they've rolled the dice a little bit. But I think they've got a lot of depth in the squad going forward. And I don't think in the run-up to it, none of the European sides, for example, have looked particularly strong or in form. Some of the teams are missing a few players through injuries. So I'll hang my hat on Brazil.
Unlike Nick, I'm backing a European nation. I've put my money where my mouth is, so I'm sticking with Germany. I've said Germany for a while. They've got a decent squad. One or two injuries, look a bit shaky, but you can never rule out the Germans, as we know. So I'm sticking with Germany.
Thanks very much, guys. Thank you, Conrad. Thank you, Nick, for those instant insights. Thanks for listening. And from us at Thematic Intelligence, see you next time.